All right, the BOI report is officially dead. The U.S. Treasury announced yesterday with the press release saying the Corporate Transparency Act, which requires LLC owners and corporations to file this BOI report, will not be enforced. The Treasury Department said we will not enforce it. We will not assess penalties. We will not assess fines. You do not have to file it. Later, Trump came out on his social, True Social, and said, the BOI requirement is burdensome on small businesses. It was a bad idea. He referenced it being the Biden rule. We're going to come back to that here in a second. It's important. And then he said, we are actually going to limit the scope of this. Now, right now, the Treasury Department, and this is as of yesterday, March 2nd, has said, we are limiting the scope of this. So the law was passed, okay? Congress passed this law, the Corporate Transparency Act, that says anyone that owns an LLC or corporation must make a filing to the federal government saying who owns 25% or more or who has substantial control. They had this online filing system at FinCEN.gov where you had to go file this and register it. It's a brand new thing. You never had to do this with LLCs and corporations until last year. Now, that has been ruled constitutional. The courts have been battling with it, and no one knew where Trump was going to land on this. He had not commented on this, nor had the Treasury Department. Well, 2 weeks ago, the last court order was removed, and you had to now file this BOI report. So even we went out and said, there's no more left. The U.S. Supreme Court has said it's valid for now. They're still considering it. There's still a case at the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to come back to that. That's important. But they've said, until that case is decided, you've got to file. And then Trump's Treasury just 2 weeks ago came out and said, your new deadline is March 21st. We're going to give you another 30 days. And to me, I thought, well, dang, the Trump administration is going to let this go. I thought there was a chance that they would say, we're actually not going to enforce this. Well, they came back 2 weeks later, yesterday, Sunday, March 2nd, and said, actually, we're not enforcing it. Don't worry about March 21st. You don't even need to file. We're not going to enforce it. Now, here's what they said they're going to do. They said they're going to go into final rulemaking. And what they want to do is limit the scope of the Corporate Transparency Act and only require foreign companies to have to report this. Any U.S.-based companies, domestic-based companies doing business established here in the U.S., they said, don't worry about it right now. You don't need to file it. Now, there's a couple of legal issues here that I need to make sure you understand. This is still a valid law. It's on the books. The Treasury Department has said, we're not going to enforce it. So what do you do? Do you need to file this thing or not? I mean, the Treasury Department said, don't worry about it, but the law is still on the books. There's still a case pending in the Supreme Court. So here's my take on it right now. You don't need to file. Treasury said we're not going to enforce penalties. So if you're setting up any new entities or you're one of those people that is delayed filing, I filed over 15 for my own companies. We filed thousands for our clients because you had to. And these cases have been going back and forth. We've been saying, don't worry about it. It's on pause. Nope, it's back. And then just 2 weeks ago, we're like, it's back. And now we're like, nope, now it's dead. It's gone. Treasury in our federal government, this is the U.S. Department of Treasury, which is where FinCEN falls under, is the one who enforces this. They are empowered under the law to enforce it and assess the fines and penalties. So they can decide, frankly, how to enforce this. Now, the executive branch and its departments need to carry out the law. They're supposed to execute and carry out the law. Congress passed this law. The U.S. Supreme Court so far has said it's constitutional. Now, here's what's happening, though, in the courts. The biggest case on this was the Texas Top Cop Shop case, which had gone through Texas and through the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's at the U.S. Supreme Court. There's a hearing on it this month. They will likely decide the case in the fall, which is usually when U.S. Supreme Court decisions actually come out after oral argument. So right now, Treasury saying, we're not going to make you do this. It's it's possible the U.S. Supreme Court could say, this is unconstitutional in the fall. And what you're going to see is probably the U.S. Department of Justice in the case saying, we don't think this is constitutional either. If Trump's Treasury Department is saying, we're not going to enforce this, we think this is a bad law, his U.S. Department of Justice in the Supreme Court, oral argument here coming up, is going to be taking the same position. The Biden Justice Department were saying this is constitutional, court, you need to uphold this. That's where we're going to see a big change here, of course, in the Justice Department in the case. All right, so now we know Treasury's not going to enforce it, so you don't need to file it. If I'm filing new LLCs, and what we're telling our clients right now, don't file it. You don't have to. You can voluntarily file if you want, and we'll file it for anybody who wants, but you don't have to. FinCEN still has the filing on their website. They're still taking filings if you want to. They may change. They haven't updated all their notices yet as of the release yesterday. Okay, so we got a little bit of it's not 100% dead. This could be brought back to life. Let's say the U.S. Supreme Court upholds it and says this law is constitutional, but then you got a Treasury Department saying we won't enforce it. What's going to happen? Okay, now you're going to get congressional hearings and you're going to get all this problem. But why aren't you enforcing the law that's on the books? Congress is going to not be happy. So we don't know where that could go, frankly. And the executive branch and Treasury is supposed to enforce a law. If Congress passes it, they don't have a choice. So that's why they're trying to go into some rulemaking here at Treasury and saying, we're going to limit this scope and say, we're not really worried about this section, U.S. small businesses in particular. These are the ones we think are the ones we're going to focus on that need to report. These are the ones where we think there's drug trafficking, money laundering, and problems happening in companies, which they think is the foreign companies. That's so far what Treasury has said. Now, there's really two outcomes that'll really be the final nail in the coffin. One is the Supreme Court saying it's unconstitutional. Again, we won't know that to the fall, but until then, you got a Treasury Department saying we're not doing anything about this, so don't worry about it. That could be a great final outcome. The second final outcome that could be good is there is a bill going through Congress right now. There's actually a bill that just passed a week or so ago that was going to move the deadline from March 21st to January 1st, 2026. It passed unanimously in the House of Representatives. Even the Democrats were in favor of moving the marker out to when U.S. businesses had to report on this. So, but there's a second bill that's trailing behind this in Congress called the Repealing Big Brother of Overreach Act. Okay, that bill is started in the House. It's still making its way through it. It was going behind the extension. And now that you see that the Trump administration is behind killing this BOI requirement, particularly for small businesses in the U.S., it is likely that we will see this this bill make its way through Congress. And I think that would also be a great outcome that would be the final nail in the coffin as well. Because if that bill gets through Congress and passed, no matter what the U.S. Supreme Court does, that will change the law. And then there's no issue of, is the executive branch carrying out the bill passed by Congress? It takes it away even from the U.S. Supreme Court because it would limit back this issue of saying you don't need to file. That's what that bill would say, by the way. That bill is going to say you don't need to file. So here's the good thing of just lay of the land right now is Treasury has said you don't need to file. The law's still on the books, but we have two very viable outcomes, the bill going through Congress and the Supreme Court hearing this year. That could be the final nail in the coffin, and you really don't need to worry about it. Now, again, if you're sitting there right now thinking, do I need to file this or not? I'm going to set up an LLC next month. I'm setting up a new company tomorrow. No, you don't. I wouldn't file it. You can, but I wouldn't file it. If you're one of the holdouts that never filed, you don't have to file. Now, what if you already filed? I filed for all of mine. We filed for thousands of clients because you had to. There's really nothing to do, frankly, because you already went through the work and did it yourself or paid someone else to do it, and you had to file it. It was a law. You had to comply with it. There's been, of course, you've been hearing us talk about this and following all the drama, the back and forth. This is the 7th back and forth, by the way, from the courts to possible bills, to the courts overturning themselves, to going up to a higher court, and now to the Treasury Department coming out and saying you don't need to file it. So now this information, by the way, if you file the BOI to the federal government at the FinCEN.gov website, that is private information. That is not searchable anywhere. Okay, this is in the Treasury records, just like your tax return and all that information is. And frankly, if you go to the genesis of this, that is why the Trump administration is getting rid of it. Just yesterday, Saturday, Terrence Williams tweeted at Elon Musk saying, I'm begging you, get rid of this BOI rule. Elon Musk says, I can look into it. Okay, a day later, this is Elon Musk in ludicrous mode. A day later, the Treasury Department announces we're not enforcing BOIs. You don't need to file it. No penalties will be assessed. We're going to go into rulemaking and limit who actually needs to file this. U.S. small businesses, don't worry about it. Okay. So they moved very quickly once this was finally got to their plate. It looks like Elon Musk was the impetus to this. Maybe not. Who really knows where the wheels are turning in government? And then, of course, President Trump announced today, actually, he came out and kind of highlighted the press release, an announcement that Treasury did yesterday that I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of how we got here in the last 48 hours, is a tweet on X from Elon Musk saying he's looking into this. And then a day later, we get the Treasury announcement saying we're not enforcing BOI on small businesses. So meanwhile, this case has, of course, been going through the courts for years in the last few months. So it's been a little bit of a whiplash. And I know a lot of people that have been following us, and you're a business owner, you've been trying to decide, do I need to file this thing or not? Feel like you've been jerked around a little bit. And I understand that. I feel like it too, but we want to let you know what's always going on. Okay, what's happening in the courts, what's going on about this. This is the biggest change in LLC and corporation law in my lifetime as a lawyer of 20 years. Nothing is bigger than this. It's a whole new set of rules. You never had to file anything to the federal government besides going and getting your tax ID. And of course, you got to file your taxes. FinCEN and Treasury saying, well, you need to report all this information you already sent to the state for the most part, and saying you need to disclose all this to us. People thought was invasive and frankly a waste of time. And so that's where I think Treasury came out at the end of the day on it as well. All right. Now, can you voluntarily file? Okay, I've had that question already for some people because they're like, Matt, I don't think this is the end of this. I've already gone back and forth on this 5 or 6 times. I don't want to worry about it. Can I just voluntarily file? You guys will do it for me anyways when you set up a new entity. Yeah, you can. Okay. Our default, and I think the default for most people needs to be don't file. If you want to file, you need to let us know, or let your professional or whoever you're using to set up your entity, hey, I know it's not required right now, but I still want to file the BOI because I don't want to worry about this. Now, again, that's not my advice, but I'm just saying if you want to take that position because you're sick of the back and forth, right now you could actually still do that. If I were you, though, I wouldn't file. Rely on this announcement from Treasury. Wait till the final rulemaking. We've got the U.S. Supreme Court decision that could come out, and we've got this other bill that could be the final nail in the coffin on it. All right. A couple other things I want to go over. LLCs, of course, as you know, you set up at the state level, you get a tax ID number, you're filing your taxes, you're reporting that income anyways. And this is really where I think the rulemaking, what Treasury is going to look at is, don't we already have this information? I think that's been the beef that a lot of people had, is like, I already had to go get a tax ID and told them I own this company. I already file a tax return and claim this income. I'm required to do that. Why do I have to file another thing to another separate branch of government in the Treasury? So I think that's kind of where you're going to see the final rulemaking. And my guess is what Treasury is going to say is, if you do these things, you have a tax ID, you claim this income, which you're legally required to anyways, you don't need to file this. And that's how they're going to try and get an end around this law and this rule, is by kind of creating some big loopholes that's going to capture every small business owner that already is legally obligated to report their income, showing, frankly, who owns the LLC and is getting that income at the end of the day. All right. The next thing I want you to know about too is my channel. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm always talking about how to protect your assets using LLCs, how to save on taxes by using S corporations or other entities that are great tax planning mechanisms. We also talk about how to build wealth using retirement accounts, investing in alternative assets. I talk about that every day here on my channel. Please make sure you're subscribed, and I'll be giving you the updates on the things you need to know to stay protected, keep saving, and protecting your wealth. I'm Matt Sorensen. We'll see you next time.